The underground comics came out during the Vietnam War, and we were all pretty much light seditionists, I would say. We were all listed with the FBI, and this stuff was considered outre. And we had a chip on our shoulder, not only to the government, but we had a chip on our shoulder to the comic book code that was written up in the mid-50s, because the comic books code pulled all the good comic books out of the newsstands because they were controversial and they were hurting children. So when we started forming Underground Comics, we had this in the back of our mind. And you think those comic books were bad, you ain't seen nothing. We violated every social code you could think of in a comic book. But I'm going to move on about that. But this is part of what's come later to be referred to as lowbrow art. And lowbrow art encapsulated and circled a lot of stuff that the art world would never touch. The formal academic art world was ashamed of. And that's comic books and hot rod art and biker art and surfer art and skateboard art and graffiti. All these really rich American art forms that just didn't match up to the academic standards that would find their way into a museum. So over the years, this is all kind of grown together into a form of alternative art. This was Zap number 5, the one I did the cover on. By this time, this was 1969, I guess there was maybe 20 underground artists by this time. Inside of 3 or 4 years, there's going to be more than 1,000 underground cartoonists in the United States. It's going to become an enormous thing that affected television and movies and society all over in different, really unidentifiable manner. This is my first art book that came out in 1979, 1980. Now the term lowbrow means that this has got all this questionable material in it that I just mentioned. This book here is where that term lowbrow came from. If you hear later in New York they had a high and low show, well, this preceded that. This is where the term lowbrow comes into our vocabulary off this book. Now, when I was putting this book together, I went to a lot of publishers, and they said they wouldn't touch that kind of book. Abrams, nobody would touch this kind of book. So I had to depend on underground publishers that had the ability to distribute this. And to get this distributed, I had to make half the book Underground Comics, so it would go through the grapevine of the distribution system of Underground Comics. This was my second book, Zombie Mystery Paintings. Okay. Let me explain myself here. Now, I was doing some really well-done, detailed oil paintings. Some of them took as much as a year. And I would find buyers that were wealthy gentlemen ever so often, and I could make a living. But I had no peer group. I was by myself. But then came the punk rock movement. And a situation come out of New York called after-hours clubs. And they were having galleries, they were after-hours clubs, and they were passing them off as art galleries so they could sell liquor without a license. So these things would go at 2 or 3 in the morning, and there'd be this salacious art on the wall that these people would do. Some of them would even do the art on the way to the gallery. They'd find stuff in the trash and bring it to the gallery. So I discovered if I really loosen up and get sloppy and get liberal with the gratuitous sex and violence, that I could find a peer group. So I started showing these paintings I call zombie mystery paintings. Now, you're looking at the thing and you go, that's interesting, but I wouldn't want that on my wall. Well, this was in an after-hours club at 2 in the morning where people had just ingested drugs and were drunk, you know, and they had mohawk haircuts, and they would cut these paintings and upchuck on these paintings, sometimes steal these paintings. It was just, I had to mentally adjust myself to realize this was an incredibly gratuitous world. If I could adjust myself to it, I would have this enormous peer group that I'd never had. So these paintings just took off very successfully. I couldn't paint them fast enough, and I was taking time payments on them. This is the second book that came out after the zombie mystery paintings. And if you notice in the back of it, in the back of that picture, there's a little landscape. Well, I'm starting to tighten up a little bit, see? I'm starting to get just a hair more academic. I'm slipping it right under the line there, see? This was incidentally the book that had the Rubberneck Manifesto in it, which was something that's been quoted quite recently.